Thank you for coming again. Thanks for braving the heat. I do have some bad news, which is once you find out what LA DWP is up to, your blood's going to boil a bit more. So I apologize in advance for that. Before we get started, I want to introduce some folks up here with me. Jack Humphreyville is the plaintiff in the lawsuit that we're announcing today, and I'll let him tell you a bit more about himself. My colleague, Pam Presley, who is a senior litigation attorney here at Consumer Watchdog, and last but not least, our good friend Tim Blood from the Blood Hurst O'Riordan firm, co-counsel on the case. And I want to acknowledge also one of our colleagues that could not be here, Rich Ayub of the Alajet, Pauli Ayub and Matarese firm, mouthful, but it's in the release. Rich is the firm itself is one of the leading, if not the leading, tax law firms in the state, dealing with state and local tax issues, a key part of our team. So we're going to just talk a bit about the lawsuit here and then keep that brief, but then open up for questions for folks on the phone and folks here at Consumer Watchdog. So we are here to announce a lawsuit against LA DWP, the Department of Water and Power in LA City, for converting ratepayer funds into tax. So these are funds that we pay to LA DWP ostensibly for the production of energy and for the infrastructure that carries the power from the power plants to our homes, right? That's a critical part of the process, because it's one thing to have the production of electricity, but another thing to get that electricity into your house. And Jack's going to talk a bit more about this, but folks in LA know what happens when you don't have a good infrastructure, especially during a heat wave. The power goes off when you need it most. The problem is that LADWP has been telling people that they've been collecting money for purposes of paying for electricity production and for building out the infrastructure. But what they're not telling folks is that each year, LADWP has been siphoning off hundreds of millions of dollars in a reserve fund and sending it over to City Hall, to the mayor's office and City Council, to use for whatever purpose it wants, like a hidden slush fund for whatever folks at City Council and the mayor's office want to spend that money on. And that's where the problem comes in, as Pam will talk to you in more detail about. What's been going on here is a two-step illegal tax. The first step is when we get that bill in the mail for the last 10 years, we've been paying for our power. And again, ostensibly, there's two purposes for that bill. One is to pay for electricity generation, and the second one is to build out the infrastructure to make sure that LADWP has sufficient infrastructure, power lines, and the technology to get the power to us all the time when we need it. Over the years, LADWP has built up a surplus of about $5 billion, all of it ratepayer money. If that was the only step, we wouldn't have a problem. The second step, though, in the two-step illegal act is that after the money has been collected, LADWP siphons off the top hundreds of millions of dollars each year and transfers that money to the City Council and City Hall and Mayor's office to use for whatever purposes they desire. My colleague Pam will talk in more detail. That's where the legal violation comes in. Under the California Constitution, if you collect a fee for a particular purpose, here for power generation and protecting the infrastructure at LADWP, that's all fine and good. But when you collect a fee for one purpose and use it for another purpose, in this case, general expenditures by the City Hall, that's where the fee is converted into an illegal tax. And that's where the City Council and the Mayor's office gets into trouble. The specific transfer that we're challenging here occurred in December of 2017, just at the end of last year. On December 12th, City Council, through an ordinance, transferred $241,884,000 from the LADWP to the City General Fund. And that's the general fund that's used to pay for general expenditures. And again, that's the problem, because once those fees are transferred from LADWP that were collected for one purpose, sent over to the City Hall for general expenditures, is when the fee is converted to a illegal tax. And the mayor signed that ordinance on December 13th. Things are heating up. You probably saw, following the blackouts of a few weeks ago during the heat wave, just Tuesday, DWP announced that to avoid unplanned blackouts, it was going to have some planned power shutoffs. Interesting linguistics. So it's not a blackout, which is an unplanned turnoff. It's a planned shutdown in order to do what? You guessed it. Build the infrastructure, repair the infrastructure that's aging. As Jack will tell you that some of this infrastructure is 70 years old, predates World War II. The problem is that had the money been used correctly, we would have the infrastructure we need in place. So, Consumer Watchdog is representing, the attorneys for Consumer Watchdog are representing, along with Tim Blood's firm and our friend Rich Ayub's firm, Jack here in the taxpayer lawsuit, because $242 million is a lot of money that could go a long way to make sure LADWP is fiscally sound and protected, and that our infrastructure for electric power generation is there. But I have to say it's a little bit more than that. It's also about holding local officials accountable, because this is really local government run amok. If city council and the mayor's office can flagrantly violate the law because they don't think anybody is watching, if they can do this, they can do other things that affect our lives and kind of mismanage the city. So this is part of a bigger effort to hold the city government accountable. And very happy to be standing here with Jack Humphreyville and my friend Tim Blood. So Jack, you want to
Sure.
say a few words?
Hi, my name's Jack Humphreyville. I'm a citizen of Los Angeles, a taxpayer of Los Angeles, and a DWP ratepayer. It's time to end this illegal tax so that this money can be used for the benefit of the ratepayers, whether it's for improving our infrastructure or whether it's paying down the monstrous levels of debt at the power system. I've been following DWP for a number of years. In 2010, the citizens of California approved Prop 26 that basically said that a fee is a tax if this money is not going to be used directly for the purpose that was outlined. Since that time, DWP has transferred over $2 billion to the city of Los Angeles, basically as a blank check to do whatever the heck they wanted to do with it. It's time to end it. It's time to end this illegal tax. The other part of this is that this tax is not even disclosed on our bill. It's buried. Unlike the 10% utility tax that's going to give $400 million of ratepayer money to the city this year, this $242 million is buried deep in the bowels of City Hall. You don't know where it's going. You have no idea that it's around. From my perspective, I'd like to see this money being used to improve our infrastructure. Last weekend, I was without power for 72 hours. I live in an area where it was built in 1920, and we still have some of the original power infrastructure there, whether it's transformers, whether it's volts, whether it's power lines. And I think we have a disproportionate amount of outages, and those outages have a fairly decent, have a longer duration than a lot of other people. One of the guys in our neighborhood counted up that this year alone we lost 3,000 minutes. Power's been out for 3,000 minutes. That's 50 hours. That's substantially above the averages that you see for Edison or other parts of the Department of Water and Power. So I think it's time to end this illegal tax. It's not disclosed. It's a ripoff of the ratepayers. It's not something that we should have to pay for. Thank you very much.
Pamela Presley, senior litigation attorney here.
Good morning. I'm just going to talk briefly a little bit more in detail about the laws that we're suing under in this lawsuit. There is a law in California which gives broad standing to taxpayers, such as Jack, and many of us who pay taxes to our local government, City of Los Angeles. In this case, you might pay utility taxes on your telephone bill or your utility bill. You might also, of course, pay property taxes that have taxes that go to the city. So any person that pays a tax to a governmental entity can bring a lawsuit on behalf of taxpayers here in the City of Los Angeles to stop an illegal scheme. And this type of standing, this type of taxpayer lawsuit is aimed at eliminating these types of illegal schemes. This illegal scheme that we're going after, the City of Los Angeles, is to prevent the illegal expenditure or waste of funds. So this is a classic example of the type of illegal scheme that this taxpayer standing provision is designed to prevent. As Jack mentioned, there's actually been 2 propositions passed in California. The first one was Proposition 218, which was approved by the voters in 1996. Under the California Constitution, it prohibits local government from imposing or increasing any kind of general or special tax unless it's first approved by the voters. And then that law was most recently amended under Prop 26 by the voters in 2010, which essentially tightened up the law to explain more explicitly what a tax actually is. So in this case, the law says that a tax is any levy or charge that's imposed by a local government except when the charge is for a specific benefit and the charges don't exceed the reasonable cost of actually providing that service. So in this case, what we're alleging is that the charges that were imposed on DWP taxpayer or ratepayers' bills were initially collected for one purpose, for paying for electricity costs. But then when the transfer occurred, here, the most recent one that was approved back in December, it became a tax at that point in time, because at that point it was no longer being reused for the purposes for which it was being collected, and it was instead being used for general purposes to fund any kind of activities such as police or fire or any services that the city wants to use that for. And so at that point in time is when it became an illegal tax. And our co-counsel is going to talk a little bit more about exactly what we're asking the city to do. But essentially, the law that we sued under, it allows us to stop the illegal activity. So we're going to ask that not only this transfer that was made most recently be returned to the DWP, but also that future transfers would be stopped under our lawsuit. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Tim Blood, and I'm one of the lawyers that is fortunate to be representing Mr. Humphreyville in this lawsuit.
Thank you.
No public official, public entity, or politician should ever charge an illegal tax, and yet that's what we're faced with here. This lawsuit is brought by a concerned citizen who is willing to stand up to power to challenge that illegal tax, to make sure that our public officials do what they are supposed to do, and that's protect the public coffers and to protect the interests of all citizens of Los Angeles. This lawsuit seeks to simply return the money from the City Council back to the DWP, where it was collected and where it is supposed to stay, to do a whole host of things that need to be done at the DWP. If anyone has ever dealt with DWP's customer service, then you know it is an absolute nightmare dealing with their customer service. That money could go a very long way to actually helping people who need help to make sure that they have their power and their water continuing to run when they've been misbilled, when they've been incorrectly billed, or when they're just being threatened with a shutoff that should never, ever, ever occur. That money could go a very long way in fulfilling the numerous infrastructure projects that the DWP has listed on their website right now that they acknowledge needs to be done. And yet they're turning money over to the general fund for the city for unspecified purposes and not for the reasons that people think they need to be paying that money for when they pay their power bill. So that's in short what we're doing with the money. And again, I want to thank Mr. Humphreyville for stepping forward and really representing all the citizens of Los Angeles to make sure that our public officials do the right thing. Frankly, I hope that this lawsuit doesn't go very far. I hope that the city attorney looks at this lawsuit and says, you know what we've been doing is wrong, and we're going to correct it, and we're going to correct it now. And hopefully we will soon be here announcing that the city is returning the money back to its rightful owner, the ratepayers of the city of Los Angeles. Thank you.
You mentioned, or you used the term slush fund. Do you allege that this is kind of like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours between City Hall and the DWP, and has this happened more than one time?
Before I answer that, I'm going to go ahead and take us off conference so
Okay.
that I don't forget to do that so folks can answer on the phone. Well, I use the term slush fund, and I use the term slush fund because if we look, for the definition of slush fund, it fits perfectly what we're dealing with here, which is, a politically motivated payment or a line item in a budget that is made for an undisclosed, unspecific purpose, and that's exactly what's going on here. In terms of like the bigger picture, how and why, we'll figure out that more as we get into it. But I am reminded of my favorite movie, which is Chinatown, which goes into the historic, illegal activity of the DWP and the close relationship between City Hall, politicians at City Hall, and DWP. And one has to wonder if something similar is happening here. And Mr. Blood has a long experience with dealing with DWP, and this sort of activity is par for course. In terms of intent, it's irrelevant for this lawsuit. We have a taxpayer withstanding, and we have a fund of money that was collected for one purpose and then converted for use for another. That's enough for a court here to order the city to give the money back to LADWP for the purpose it was intended.
But you mentioned it happened in December. Has it happened previously in a similar fashion?
Yes, and we'll, as we get into discovery on this issue, and I think Jack wanted to make a point on that, but I'll answer the question. As we get into discovery on this, we will, I'm sure, dig into more of these types of transfers. So we'll be looking at transfers that occurred both previously that fit the same bill, where we have, or the same model, where money was collected for one purpose and transferred and used for another. Obviously, there's also, sort of a going forward basis to prevent future transfers as well. We're focused on the December transfer because that occurred as we're watching the DWP very closely, and we have captured the key documents that documented that transfer at that time. So that's sort of the focus of the suit, but the way it's drafted, it would cover other similar types of transfers as well.
Yeah. You mentioned that you scratch my back, I scratch your back. That's wrong. This is something that is mandated by the City Council and by Mayor Garcetti. It is rubber stamped by the politically appointed Board of Commissioners who have no black backbone, who could give a damn about the ratepayers. Actually, sort of thinking about this, people sort of ask me why I'm doing it. And it reminds me, Jerry mentioned Chinatown, I'm going to mention the movie Network. I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Yeah, we really appreciate Jack as someone who, I'm sure he'll tell you the story, but as someone who cares about the city, started watching DWP, and now he's here because I think if you take the time to look at what's happening at DWP, the natural progression for anyone that's paying taxes and rates to LADWP would be outraged at the way the city's being run, the way DWP is being run. I want to open up for other questions, either here in the room or on the phone.
So the transfer of the money, does it come from any particular item that's represented on the bill, or is it overall surplus for the city-owned utility? Another term of that maybe would be profit if it were a corporation.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's not. So it comes from the revenues collected by the DWP. It's not surplus and it's not profit. This is a public corporation that's intended for the public good. If there's money left over, it ought to go back to the ratepayers. But we also know that there's not money left over, that the DWP has a tremendous need for more money to do primarily infrastructure improvement. So in a given year, they may have a balanced budget, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have tremendous need for money into the future, because obviously with this type of equipment that we're dealing with, you need to continually reinvest in that in those facilities to make sure that we have power into the future.
Well, maybe ask that a different way though. Is every item that's on the bill, taxes, fees, all that stuff, have you accounted for all of that to know that it doesn't come, that it's not represented by some chance in any of those?
Right. It's not. I mean, it's not a line item on any bill. It's just it is revenue that is collected, and then they decide how much they want to turn over later on. The city does.
And maybe there's one point of clarification there. The lawsuit itself is not focused on the collection of the money itself, which is, if you look in the lawsuit, and various statements from DWP, we're told over and over again the money is collected for purposes that are totally legal, which are paying for power production and paying for electricity generation. As Jack mentioned, it's just nowhere on the bill does it say, oh, and also we're going to be sending money over to the city every couple of years for whatever they want to do with it. What the lawsuit is focused on, the illegal activity here, is not the collection of the money, but it's when the money was sitting in LADWP, it's the transfer of that, and that's when the conversion occurred. Had the money stayed at DWP, we wouldn't be here today, because DWP could control that money for, not just sitting in a reserve fund so they can send it to the city, but to do things that benefit ratepayers and are in line with its public service. I don't know, Pam, did you want to say anything on that?
I was just going to say,
It's an important question, thank you.
Just to sort of describe the pots of money, there's sort of like 3 different funds that are being implicated here. And the first is, this is money that has been built up in the LADWP Power Revenue Fund. So that's money that is being collected, supposed to be used for electric services and power services. When the ordinance was passed to transfer this money, the money that the $250 million that we're talking about is being transferred from the LADWP Power Revenue Fund to what's called the LA City Reserve Fund, and eventually that LA City Reserve Fund is transferring that money into the general fund to be used for general purposes. So there's sort of like 3 different pots of money, and it's ultimately getting transferred to the general fund, and that's the process. The transfer at that point in time when it's being transferred from the Power Revenue Fund, where it should stay and be used for purposes that it was collected for, and it's being transferred to the city's fund. That's at the point in time that it's becoming an illegal tax that we're challenging.
It is reminiscent of a sort of a money laundering operation where there is money collected for one purpose, and then by being transferred to various bank accounts, transformed into something separate. Except here it's sort of a reverse money laundering, right? Here it started out as a legal purpose and was converted into an illegal purpose, as opposed to money laundering usually starts the other way.
And your legal argument hangs on that proposition?
Yes, the legal argument is based on Prop 26 and the taxpayer standing provision that Pam mentioned that's in the lawsuit and in the release. But the focus here is on that conversion moment.
And you want them to be using the money to upgrade the system.
For the purposes that it was intended, and not being utilized for whatever purpose the city intends. And one thing we didn't mention, but it's important to mention, is that what Prop 26 said is that if you want to collect money from taxpayers for a general purpose, you can do it, but you got to get voter approval. And so that's what didn't happen here. So the city doesn't want to tell people that we need some more money. What they're doing is taking the money that was collected for infrastructure repair to prevent blackouts and converting it into a slush fund to be used for other purposes. If they want to do that, they have to ask the voters' approval. And that's why? Because this is the thing that drives people nuts, right? It's passed 2 initiatives. People pay, folks in LA pay a fee for a service, trash collection, power, and we say, that's a good purpose. I see it's a lot of money, but the DWP is telling me we need to build our infrastructure. I'm going to do it. I'm going to pay for it. Pay the money, and only to find out that the money now is being used, to fund a statue of Mayor Garcetti and the downtown park or whatever. If the city wants to ask for additional funds for a general purpose, it can ask the voters to do that.
Can you say your first and last name, please?
Sure. Jerry Flanagan, Litigation Director for Consumer Watchdog.
Thank you.
Hey, Jerry, I have a question. With the money that's being transferred to this fund, what is the city doing with those funds? What's happening with those funds?
We, when I say it's undisclosed, we literally do not know. We do see the money, and if folks want to see this later, I can print it off. We do see the money being allocated in the budget. It'll show up as the power transfer, and we see it as a line item, but it's not earmarked for any particular thing. It's just kind of thrown into the pot. And that's part of the, one of the problems here is that, the money was collected for a particular purpose, but now it's being allocated to the city for another purpose, and that's where the illegal violation occurs. So we don't. The answer is we don't know exactly how it's going to be spent, and I think we're intended not to know. We see the money show up in the budget as an allocation from LADWP, but it doesn't have a corresponding output to how it's being used. It's part of the overall number.
And then a follow-up question with regards to people at home who would say, well, that's not a bad thing if the money's being used for police, fire. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we have a lot of needs in the state and the city for public services, but what we're talking about here is the integrity of our local government, is that if local government wants to and needs money and wants to raise money for a particular purpose that we care about, then the city should come to us and say, look, we as a community, or a tax, if the city wants to raise a tax for a particular purpose for an issue we care about, like fire and police, they should just come and tell us. And you never know what the voters are going to do, but if it's for an important purpose that we care about, voters will probably approve it. The problem here is that there's some nefarious activity going on. For some reason, the city doesn't want to ask the question to voters. What they'd rather do is take money that was collected by the LADWP for power infrastructure repair and transfer it through various accounts and turn it to a general expenditure to be used God knows how. And that's why I said, this lawsuit's really about not only a lot of money that could be useful for the LADWP to build the infrastructure, but it's also about holding local government accountable to make sure that the ship is running correctly and not, local officials, working behind the scenes and doing something that, is not upfront with voters.
Right. So, I think stated another way, charging an illegal tax is not a remedy for political fiscal mismanagement. And that's what we have here. What we need is proper fiscal management. There are certainly needs, and the democratic process analyzes what those needs are and allocates limited funds. That's how the system is supposed to work, not through an illegal tax.
One thing on the city budget, the city's going to go out there and tell us that, we use this money for the cops and the firefighters, for parks and all sorts of good causes. This last year, the city has had record revenues in the general fund of $6.6 billion, an absolute record. They really don't need this money if they were budgeting and running their budgeting properly and running their operations efficiently. So we're going to hear a lot of stuff from City Hall that you're basically pushing widows and old ladies into the streets, but that's a bunch of baloney. What's going on here is that the city's experiencing record revenues and they're unwilling to go out there and run their books properly and run their operations efficiently.
Any other questions from the room or on the phone?
Is that it?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
you.
you. So,
And for the record, because I wasn't here earlier, can you each one of you spell your name and give us your title, please?
Yeah, my name is Jack Humphreyville. Actually, in the lawsuit is John. That's my real name. And my last name is spelled Humphreville. I'm a resident of the city of Los Angeles. I'm a DWP ratepayer. I'm a contributor to citywatchla.com, an online publication. I'm a member of the I'm a neighborhood council budget advocate, and I'm also chair of the DWP advocacy committee that's associated with the neighborhood councils.
Sir, behind you.
And my name is Timothy Blood, B-L-O-O-D, and I am a consumer protection lawyer.
and everyone's name is in the materials there. But I'll
Yeah, I
let
just
Pam-
wanted to make sure, just so that they have a visual
Yeah.
here.
Pamela Presley, Pressley. I'm senior attorney here at Consumer Watchdog.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Great.
Thank
If
you.
if you need anything else, we're happy to repeat anything. And now that we've had a practice run,
Yeah, because I kind of missed the beginning, I'm just
Yeah.
not quite sure what I did miss. We kind of covered it in the back end, but I guess my question was more so too, just how this all came about, what prompted Jack to do this?
do you want to-
Yeah, go on.
Sorry,
Yeah, your question is what prompted me to do this. I've been following the Department of Water and Power for about 10 to 12 years. And this been following for 10 to 12 years. And basically, I'm sick and tired of, having to pay this transfer fee, which is an undisclosed, tax on the ratepayers. We've been through this for years and years and years. We've been yelling and screaming and hollering, and the people down at City Hall basically have told us to stuff it. You know, since Prop 26 passed, DWP has funneled over $2 billion over to the city's general fund, which, you know, sort of, as Jerry sort of said, is a slush fund. It's a blank check, whatever you want to do it. They think DWP ratepayers, City Hall thinks DWP ratepayers are an ATM. And I'm sick and tired of it, and I'm not going to put up with it anymore. And that's sort of my basic motivation. One is a ratepayer, and two is a taxpayer.
All right, I think that's it.
Okay.